Good morning, everyone. I'm John Flell. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, we're going to be discussing 3 mistakes to avoid in poker tournaments. If you're here early, click the like, click the subscribe button before we get started. Hope you all enjoyed the pre-show. I'm clearly not set up for today. I just got out of the shower and cut my face. So if you see me bleeding profusely, that's how it goes in the morning sometimes. So, we have 3 things I want to make sure that you do in poker tournaments. The first is stop overvaluing suited connectors pre-flop. These hands are excellent, excellent, excellent when you are playing deep stacked. They're excellent when you're playing in cash games in general, deep stack poker. They're not so good when you're playing shallow stacked. Next, stop playing too tightly. Post-flop from out of position. A lot of people check fold far too often, and that is a mistake. And then third, stop making thin plays for lots of chips, because if a play makes $1, but it costs you your $100,000 stack, some portion of the time it's probably not worth the risk. So let's get right to it. We're going to be discussing stop overvaluing suited connectors pre-flop. Here we have the Poker Coaching app. If I can resize it and fit it all on the screen, that would be amazing. Wouldn't that be amazing? There we go. Oh my gosh, what is happening here? We'll figure this out in just a second. I apologize for the delay. This will have to do. Oh my gosh. It's going to be one of those days today, huh? Computer just doesn't cooperate. Come on, computer. All right, let's say we are playing 80 big blinds deep, okay? Super deep stacked in a tournament on the button versus a raise from the, I don't know, let's say against under the gun. Under the gun raises. Look at all these suited connectors that get to call. 5-3 suited gets to call on the button when you are playing 80 big blinds deep. What about when you're playing 60, though? 5-3 suited plays a little bit less. What about when you're playing 40? 5-3 suited plays none. What about when you're playing 25? 5-4 suited starts to play almost none. What about 20? They're all starting to play pretty much none. Okay? So you see, the weaker suited connectors get far weaker as you get shallower and shallower. Medium suited connectors are still good, but notice 80 big blinds deep, even stuff like Jack 8 suited is played almost every time against under the gun. Now, what about if we're against a later position raise? Let's say we're against the low Jack seat, and we are on the cutoff. 80 big blinds deep. I want cutoff versus low jack or hijack raise. So cutoff against hijack. Let's look at cutoff against hijack. Notice you don't really get to call a whole lot of suited connectors to begin with, even 80 big blinds deep. Now, why would that be? You don't get to call the 8-7 suited and 7-6 suited and 6-5 suited and 5-4 suited in the cutoff because you have a player on the button yet to act plus 2 additional players. So the suited connectors already are not so good right there if you're not playing in the or on the button. So what if now we start to get shallower stack? Let's look at 60 big blinds. 8-7 suited just folds. Hijack raises, you're in the cutoff. 8-7 suited just puts it in the muck, 60 big blinds deep. Now look, I will say that you can probably play slightly wider than these charts recommend. These charts are tournament charts, though. These are charts that recommend, or that they assume you're playing with an ante and no rake, so this is supposed to be kind of loose. But even then, 60 big blinds deep, it's not good enough. You can probably call a little bit wider because most people don't 3-bet enough in general yet to act. But if somebody attacks and 3-bet a lot, then you should be folding. What about if we're 40 big blinds deep? Now notice 9-8 suited even folds a little bit. What about 25 big blinds deep? Cutoff versus raise from hijack. What about 25 big blinds deep? You see now 9-8 suited just basically folds every time. Hijack raises, 9-8 suited just folds when you're in the cutoff. What if you make matters worse for us? Say we're in early position. Let's say we are under the gun plus 2, 8-handed. So this is the low jack versus a raise from under the gun. Notice now, basically no suited connectors besides the high ones. Suited Broadway hands get to continue. Whereas when we're 80 big blinds deep, you do see you still get even then, they're just not that good. What it amounts to is I think a lot of people overvalue suited connectors before the flop in general, in most scenarios, in, all poker games, but tournaments especially. They think, all right, I want to call and see the flop, but that's just not necessarily true. Let's take a look at small blind strategy. Small blind against under the gun, 80 big blinds deep, you do get to call pretty wide. 40 big blinds deep, though, a little bit less. 25 big blinds deep, you still get to splash, but you're not calling with 7-5 suited and 10-7 suited, stuff like that in the small blind. 15 big blinds deep, though, you start to see a lot of the weaker ones fold, right? Then once you get down to 12 big blinds, you're not going to play very many at all, okay? They're just not very good hands whenever you are somewhat shallow stacked. The junky suited connectors I'm referring to. Big blind, though, you're going to call every suited connector every time, no matter what. So, I mean, we can look at like every chart here. I mean, if we look at 25 big blinds, you see they call. 40 big blinds, they call. 60 big blinds, they call. 80 big blinds, they're going to start to re-raise some, the good ones. But you do see, whenever you're in the big blind, you just don't get to fold. But I do think that is certainly a leak that a lot of people have. I think a lot of people play suited connectors in basically every scenario. Okay? Let's take a look at what we do when we're re-raise. Let's say we're 40 big blinds deep, and let's say we're in the cutoff versus a 3-bet from the button. Notice we're supposed to call lots of suited connectors here because the button's range should be very wide. What about in the small blind? Well, now if the small blind 3-bets, we're going to be folding out the weaker suited connectors. And against the big blind, we're going to do roughly the same thing, but even probably a little bit tighter. So we do see like 8-7 suited just folds. So if you raise the button 40 big blinds deep and the big blind 3-bets, I'm sorry, if you raise cutoff 40 big blinds deep and the big blind 3-bets, you should be folding out 8-7 suited, 7-6 suited, 6-5 suited, 5-4 suited. If, let's say you raise low jack seat versus a 3-bet from the button. You see, now you do get to continue the suited connectors 40 big blinds deep. Let's take it down to 25 big blinds deep, though. You see, now the weaker ones are going to start folding out, right? What about against the cutoff? Still get to stick around. You're going to find these hands usually get to stick around against a somewhat small 3-bet. This chart presumes you made it 2 big blinds, your opponent makes it like 5 or 5.5. If your opponent's making it something like 7 or 8, you have to be way tighter. All this is to say, suited connectors are fine hands when when you're in a obviously good spot. But as the spot gets worse and worse, and usually it's pretty obvious pretty quickly if the spot is not particularly good, these are situations where you need to be folding out a decent amount of time. Okay? Charts seem tight. Maybe they are tight, but they're good. Even with position you fold with the low suited connectors, apparently. You got to realize, in position, but against a strongish range as the big blind should have, you need to be getting out of the way. Next, let's talk about stop playing too tightly post-flop from out of position. All right, so we're going to use PioSolver for this one. Where did it go? You see this okay? Hopefully this is going to work properly. This will work. Okay. We're looking at a spot where the button raises 40 big blinds deep, and the big blind calls. So, hopefully you can see this. But you see, this says the pot right here, 59. This is 5.9 big blinds. So we have a min raise, we have a call, small blind, and ante. Is that right? Am I looking at the right spot? Yeah, button versus big blind. That's what we're looking at. Starting stacks are 37.8. So I guess there was a slightly bigger than min raise. That's fine. Slightly bigger than min raise, whatever. And then we have the bet size options over here. Just put a decimal before the last digit. So this is bet 1.5 big blinds. This is bet 3.5 big blinds. This is bet 59 big blinds. And this is all in. All right. So the flop comes 10-6-3. Okay. Big blind's supposed to check everything. That's what this shows. All the green hands are checked. I know some of you are colorblind. I cannot help with that today. Here is what the button is supposed to do. Notice they do not continuation bet every time. And when they do bet in this scenario, they're usually betting using a bigger size because the board is somewhat dynamic. And this board, kind of connects well with the opponent's range to some extent, but not so much. So we do see mostly pot-sized bets being used, 40 big blinds deep on the 10-6-3 rainbow board. We do see some small bets being used. In general, though, if you see like tiny fractions being used, it's probably just fine to load all them into one bet size for simplicity. All right, so we see all these hands are betting, mostly over pairs, top pairs, probably some middle pairs, right? Yeah, some good middle pairs are betting. Bottom pairs, not so much. And then a bunch of draws. What are draws on 10-6-3? That's going to be open-ended straight draws and gut shots. Or actually, maybe not open-ended, but a lot of gut shots will bet for sure. So we do see 9-8, 10-9, and 10-8 betting a lot. And we'll see random overcards betting like Queen Jack, King Jack, stuff like that. Why not open-endeds like 5-4? Why do you not bet 5-4, 40 big blinds deep here for pot? Well, if you pot it and your opponent shoves all in, you got to fold, and that's a disaster. You don't really mind betting 9-8 for a gut shot and having to fold because you're probably in bad shape. But with open-ended, you don't really want to be betting in these situations. Notice we also see some bluffs a lot of people do not necessarily pick. Ace-7, Ace-5, Ace-4, Ace-2, King-7 offsuit, King-8 offsuit, King-9 offsuit, Queen-9 offsuit, Queen 8 offsuit. These are hands a lot of people do not bluff often enough with. And it makes sense to bluff these because if you bet and get called, you have an overcard, you have backdoor draws. They're not such bad hands to bet. Also notice we have some hands down here betting that a lot of people miss. King 4 suited, Queen 4 suited, Jack 4 suited, Queen 5 suited, Jack 5 suited. A lot of people miss these hands as well as good, clear, logical bluffs. And then these hands here with, especially with backdoor flush draws, are we betting very frequently with, same story, backdoor draws. They're essentially junky draws. So whatever, say button bets pot. What should the big blind continue with? Take a look at this range and ask yourself, do you continue all the hands in green? Basically, any pair is going to call, right? The hands in gray, by the way, are not in our range because we would have folded them pre-flop. So what are hands that you may not continue with? Well, very obvious ones are ace high. You're going to continue with all, well, at least the decent ace high backdoor draws. A lot of people do, a lot of people don't. Remember, your opponent potted it, okay? They didn't make a tiny bet, they potted it. Is our chat working today? If the chat's working, type something in the chat. Click the like and subscribe button. I would appreciate that. Notice King Jack and Queen Jack with backdoor draws. Even without the backdoor flush draw continues a decent chunk of the time. King Jack of clubs on 10-6-3 no club is supposed to check and call a lot of the time. All Queen Jacks are checking and calling. Seems a little dicey, right? Seems a little dicey. A lot of people don't do that. King Queen. You're supposed to call every single King Queen. Do you check call a pot-sized bet out of position with the King Queen on the 10-6-3? Most people do not. What about 7-4 for a gut shot? What about 7-5 for a gut shot? For a pot-sized bet, remember, they're potting it. What about bottom pair? What about the 3-2? Funny enough, 3-2 clubs actually supposed to fold. Surprised to see 3-2 clubs folding. But hey, whatever. But funny to think that like King Queen offsuit is substantially better than 3-2. So, anyway, say you do call. A lot of people think, well, if I call with the King Queen, what am I going to do on the turn in the river? Say the turn is a 2 of clubs. Take a look at this. Now, we're supposed to be going for bets a lot. Well, at least a decent amount of the time. 24% leads for 25% pot. 4.4 big blinds into 17.7. And you see, we're going to start bluffing sometimes with stuff like Queen Jack and whatnot. But we do check a lot. Say we check. Opponent's going to check behind some here. Notice they're supposed to check 35%. Say it does go check, check. And the river is 8 of clubs. Fine. On the 8 of clubs river, look what you do with these King Queens and Queen Jacks and King Jacks. All these overcards. You rip it in. 10, 6, 3, 2, 8. This is a board where most of your bets on the river are either very tiny, 25% pot, or probably smaller actually, or all in. And we actually go all in a lot on this river. Why are we going all in a lot on this river? Well, if you consider the opponent's checking range on the turn, look at their checking range. Ace high, king high, middle pair, bottom pair, queen high, jack high. Not a lot of good hands, right? So the opponent's range is really trash when it goes check, check. So when you put up a random card that doesn't really line up with their range, I mean, look, if we put an 8 of clubs on the river, notice they do make some pairs, but not a lot. So say we do put the 8 of clubs up on the river. Now we can value shove for 1.7x pot with top pair. Top pair, 10-7. Top pair, no kicker, is good for an all-in value shove. And if top pair is good enough for a value shove, then obviously you get to have a lot of bluffs, right? So we do see like ace 9, king jack, queen jack, stuff like that is all jamming. These hands are all jamming as a bluff. Obviously, if we have a gut shot like 7-4, we're going to be jamming that as a bluff. 7-5, also a gut shot, we're jamming this as a bluff. 5-4 is the nuts. That's good for us. 6-2 is the nuts. Interesting to see that 6-2 and 3-2 are not going for shoves that often, probably to protect the checking range. You do need to protect your checking range a little bit. Notice if we do check and the opponent is going to bet, they're not going to bet all in. And notice now, we do need to make sure we have a decent number of defends. So we do have some 10s that call, but we have a lot of 6s that are going to call. And we also have some nuts down here with 2 pairs, right? What positions are we playing? I guess it's off your screen. We are playing 40 big blinds deep, button versus the big blind. Okay, 40 big blinds deep, button versus the big blind. Okay? So, what I want to show, though, is that On the flop, all the way back here on the flop, we check, opponent pots it. Most people fold too often. They don't stick around with these hands like king, queen, queen, jack, etc. And then when it goes check, bet, call, check, check, turn, you're not going to have all that many bluffing hands, which is actually a bit of a problem. You want to make sure you have a logical amount of bluffs, and it turns out those are pretty good to use. What about if instead of betting pot, the opponent bets small, which they should do sometimes, and a lot of people will bet small with everything. We actually have a section in the advanced tournament course on what to do against people who bet small every time instead of GTO. This what we're about to show you presumes they're playing GTO, but if they're betting small with everything, I can already tell you we're going to do a lot of calling and a lot of raising. Anyway, let's say they bet small. Now take a look at what we're supposed to continue with. Ask yourself, against a 1.5 big blind pot bet, do you call all these hands in green? Well, every ace pretty much is calling. Notice ace-2 offsuit does fold. So lots of aces are calling. Obviously, the king, queen, and queen, jack, and whatnot are going to call. If they're calling against a pot size bet, they're obviously calling against a smaller bet. King 9 offsuit. Check calls sometimes. Queen 9 offsuit. Jack 9 offsuit. Check calls out of position sometimes. Seems dicey, seems loose, but it is definitely going to be ideal against a tiny bet. What about stuff like gut shots, obviously? What about stuff like 7-5 for, gut shots, obviously. Remember how earlier I said you would be check raising with a lot of your gut shots, but not your open-endeds? Notice here, now open-ended straight draw check raises way more often. Why is that? Well, now if we check raise, what am I saying? No, this is, I said the other thing. Earlier I said the opponent's going to be betting pot. Opponent doesn't necessarily want to bet pot with their open-endeds. Let's go back to the opponent strategy. They still do a lot of checking, I suppose. Maybe I was talking about the wrong thing earlier. My apologies if my brain is confused. It's early in the morning. So yeah, if they pot it, notice we don't raise the 5-4, right? Because we don't want to raise to 13 big blinds and get jammed, right? Now, okay, I'm getting to the right point. Here, if they bet small, we're going to raise more often with the 5-4 because they're going to be less likely to jam over the 5 big blind raise as opposed to the 13 big blind raise, right? If we make it 5 and then they shove, then we can easily get out of the way. Say we do raise. Notice they actually don't rip it in anyway. They really don't raise all that often at all. That's cool to see. All right, fine, whatever. Say we do check call. Again, notice stuff like even Jack 5, backdoor flush draw. That check calls. Queen 5, backdoor flush draw. Queen 7, backdoor flush draw. Jack 8, backdoor draw, right? All these hands are good enough to either call or raise. And a lot of people just don't do this. They play a little bit too weak and tight from out of position. And this is a board that comes up very often. A board that doesn't really have a whole lot. And I think, if anything, most people continuation bet too frequently on this board. And if your opponent continuation bets too frequently, a great exploit just in general is to apply aggression. Notice that we definitely err towards continuing with backdoor draws, backdoor flush draws, as opposed to not. Like notice Queen 4 offsuit, check folds every time. Whereas Queen 4 suited with a backdoor flush draw calls or raises every time. Right? So having that backdoor flush draw is quite valuable just because it's going to give you lots of additional bluffing opportunities later. Notice when we are facing the tiny bet, we do a lot more raising. Against the pot size bet, let's just go back and check. Against the pot size bet, we raise almost none, 7% of the time. And that's because when your opponent pots it, they are presumably quite polarized and quite strong. Against the small bet, though, we're going to be raising more often, up to 24% of the time, or 23% of the time, right? So we get to check raise far more often against small bets, and we have to continue far more often against small bets. Notice we're only folding 29% of the time, right? So cool stuff to see. Notice stuff like 7-5 for the gut shot raises a lot. 2 pairs are raising, etc., etc. Something else I want to show here is you want to stop making thin plays for lots of chips. All right, this is one that some GTO wizards agree with, some do not. But when there's a lot of money on the line in a tournament and you're playing somewhat shallow stack, you really just don't want to go broke. Now, you obviously do want to win the hand. You want to realize your equity. But at the same time, you can't just make thin plays because they are probably good or because they make you a tiny amount of money. So let's put ourselves in our opponent's shoes, okay? Flop comes, big blind checks. What do? Let's say we do use the pot size bet with this range, as we very often should. Opponent calls. Turn is what? Let's say the turn's a queen of clubs. They check everything now because the queen is really bad for them. We're going to be betting pretty frequently here, which I completely agree with. I think we need to be betting this turn very frequently. Anytime the turn brings a high overcard for the That should connect well with the pre-flop aggressor's bluffs. You should usually be betting pretty often. And notice how wide we are betting in this spot. Notice obviously every queen's going to bet for top pair, but also all the tens are still going to bet. Tens are just good enough to put in money, right? Sixes are going to be the hands that mostly like to check, but we don't really have a whole lot of sixes, right? But sixes are airing towards check. Obviously threes too, but we don't really have a whole lot of threes. So what else is there? Well, sixes and threes. We could have ace high. But all right, we check a lot of our ace high on the flop, right? If we go back to our checking range, notice all the weaker ace high just checks it back. So we don't really have those. One important thing to know is when you bet kind of polarized to begin with, because notice we're only betting 36% of our range here. It's either going to be good hands or draws. When we do this, and they call, and it turns a queen of clubs, and they check everything, our range is pretty good. It's either really good made hands or trash. So take a look at what the trash does. King 9, King 8, King 7, all are betting very frequently. And when we do bet here, we're betting 10 big blinds into 17, right? And we're going to be jamming a lot on the river. I can already tell you this. But what I'm going to recommend to you is to not jam quite so wide. So I do like betting pretty often on this obviously good turn. When the turn's obviously good, you bet often. Like say the turn's a king, same thing. Turn's a king, they're going to check everything, we bet a lot. It's obviously a good turn for us, right? Interestingly enough, I don't know, you would think an ace is going to be good, but maybe it's not. Let's see. Say it's the ace of clubs instead. Oh, we still do bet everything. But interesting to note, the king is actually a better turn for us than the ace. And that's because the opponent's going to have a lot of ace-x to check call. At least some ace-x to check call. And notice we really don't have a lot of ace-x. Because we would have checked it back on the flop, right? Anyway, let's go back to the queen. Say it turns a queen, they check. We bet 10. They call. Look how wide they're supposed to call, by the way. Take a look. Look at how wide we are supposed to call. In the big blind, you're supposed to call with any top or any pair of tens. Notice we don't really have many queens, which is a big bummer, which is why the opponent gets to bet so often. And then do we continue with sixes? Well, look, king 6 continues, jack 6 continues usually, 9-6 usually, 8-6 usually, 7-6 starts to fold some, and the weaker ones fold usually. Funny enough, the 2 actually does call, I suppose because the 2 is super duper live. Notice now we do still check call some 5-4s, even for a pretty big bet. Notice, though, the gut shots all fold out at this point. The 9-8, 8-7, 7-5, 7-4, these are all getting out of the way. Bottom pair are going to be folding. Look at our raises as well. Notice we are starting to get kind of shallow. The opponent bets 11, and we only have 32 left, so we are shoving with our queens, our good queens. And some draws. What are the draws here? So we have 9-8, some 5-4. We have the 2 pair. Interesting to see some jack 10s and king 10s shove. I would definitely not have logically thought to shove the jack 10 and king 10 in this scenario. That's cool to see. Also worth noting is that stuff like 10-3 is slow playing still. Notice 6-3 is also slow playing. It is fine to slow play. We do see queen 3 shoving though. GTO mixes it up. Queen 6 slow plays. And look, in this scenario, the reason you're slow playing is primarily because your range is pretty garbage to check call the turn. I mean, look at our check calling range, right? It's mostly 10s and 6s. So with 10s and 6s, it's a pretty weak range. Anyway, say we call. River comes, whatever. What do we want to make the river? You want to make it bad for us? We'll make it bad for us first. Say it's a king of clubs. We're going to check everything. They're going to jam almost everything. Notice on the river, they're jamming almost everything. And now we have a lot of break-even spots with all these situations. And notice stuff like 9-6 is supposed to call it off. 10-7 is supposed to call it off. And obviously any top pair is going to call it off. Notice every 10 calls it off. Feels kind of rough to check call the pot-sized bet on the flop. The queen's obviously good for them. They bet, we call. River's a king, it's obviously good for them. We check, they bet. We have to call it off with the 10-2. The 10-4, the 10-5. Feels rough, right? Now, to be fair, I think it's actually probably okay to exploitatively overfold in this spot. And the reason I think it's okay to exploitatively overfold in this spot is because I don't think most people find all the bluffs. Let's look at what the opponent should have. After we call, turns a king of clubs, we check everything. Look at what they should be jamming with. 9-5, they should be jamming. 8-5, 8-7, 9-7. Jack 9's the nuts. Jack 8. They should basically be jamming anything that can't win at the showdown. If they don't have a 10 or a 6, they should be jamming. Which is kind of cool to see, right? Notice they should even be bluffing probably a lot of their ace highs, right? Look, notice ace 5 and ace 4 jam. Usually ace highs, ace 4, ace 2. These hands don't necessarily love jamming river, but they do here because this is such a good river for the opponent, right? So they're really only checking back marginal made hands that have showdown value. And they are shoving everything else. Because they're shoving everything else, we're essentially put in a spot where we're indifferent. So, going back to the slide, stop making thin plays for lots of chips. If they can make us indifferent by shoving, well, if anything, we should probably err towards folding the hands that are close calls. So which hands are close calls? You can use a little bit of logic here. The sixes are going to be close. So you see, any hand that's using a mixed strategy, like notice ace-6 and jack-6 are using mixed strategies, those are already going to be close, okay? Any hand that's using mixed strategy is going to be close, and it's probably just fine to fold all of those. So sixes, they're done. Sixes are out. Are any 10s actually close? Well, it looks like not really. Maybe the 10-5 is folding some tiny portion of the time, but all the other 10s are just calling. So here, I think it's perfectly fine to fold out the sixes, even though they do call some portion of the time, but it's probably not okay to fold out the 10s, which is annoying. It's rough. Now, if you think your opponent doesn't bluff ever, then obviously you start folding out a ton. But imagine if you folded out every 10 in your range, right? That doesn't have two pair. And if you look at this range, that's actually a lot of the range. But now what, we're folding every time? Pretty much. What, we're calling it exactly king 6 and queen 6 and queen 10? That's it. It's not a lot. Right? So, I mean, if you're folding out almost everything, then all your opponent has to do is put you all in and they just win the pot and smash you. So you have to be careful that you're not overly exploitable. Let's take a look at a different river instead. Let's say the river's not so bad for us instead. Let's say the river's 2 of clubs. Not great, not terrible. We're going to check everything still. They're still going to shove a lot, not nearly as much as before. Notice now they do have to check back some ace-king type stuff. Notice king-jack doesn't even get to bluff. Kind of interesting to see. Ace-jack doesn't get to bluff. They are not betting bottom pairs, obviously. They are checking back some 10s now, so that makes some sense, right? Notice king 9 and king 8 doesn't get to bluff all that often. That's because this is a worse river for them, right? When the river's worse for them, they don't get to bluff so often. Notice all these ace highs are not bluffing now. They can just check it back. Okay, fine. By the way, whenever the turn of the river are really good for you, you bet very often, right? And when the turn of the river are not good for you, you don't bet very often. So anyway, we're still betting here. What should we call off with now on the 10, 6, 3, queen 2 board? It started drilling over my head. Perfect timing, everyone. Perfect timing for a nice drilling session. All right. Notice now, sixes are calling some, right? Notice like ace-6 is 100% call. 9-6 calls way more in this situation than the other one, but it's probably okay to fold. 6-4, same story. Probably okay to fold. Notice even like 4-3 and 3-2. 3-2 is the nuts now, but 4-3 calls sometimes. So look, what I'm saying though is in these spots, it's probably fine to fold out these thin-ish hands. I don't mind it, as long as your opponent's not overly insane. Going back to your opponent's strategy, should your opponent take all the thin bluffs? Well, notice like king 9 and king 8 and king 7 bet roughly half the time each, right? So if this hand's betting roughly half the time each, should we be taking this bluff? Well, if the opponent is going to call the turn tighter than GTO, or call preflop tighter than GTO, which a lot of people do, and then they're going to get to the river with a stronger range, that means, if anything, you can logically assume they're going to call off the river slightly more than GTO recommends because they're not going to have quite as many trashy hands, right? So if they don't have quite as many trashy hands, then we, in turn, should not bluff quite as often with all of our trashy hands. So I think it's probably fine to not bluff so often. And this leads to you bluffing a little bit less often in tournaments and therefore calling a little bit less often when your opponents do shove. Now, some people will take the opposite approach and think, all right, my opponent is probably going to call off a little bit too tightly. If they're going to call off a little bit too tightly, then I, in turn, should be jamming way more often, which is true. A great strategy against most people is just bet flop, bet turn, jam river. 40 big blinds deep. And they're just going to fold a lot because they're going to have a lot of middle pairs. Like in this scenario, we're going to jam river. Notice they have a lot of sixes. They have a lot of 10s. And notice they have almost no queens on 10, 6, 3, queen 2. Look, they have almost no queens. Look at the queen line here. They have literally queen 10 and queen 6. That's it. Over here, queen 10 and queen 6. That's it. Why are those the only queens they have? Because whenever we bet the flop for pot, they fold all the queens, unless it has a pair, right? So they have almost no queens. So if they fold out their 10s and worse, which I'm telling you, a lot of people will if you want to put all your money in, 21 big blinds, you're just going to smash them. Imagine even they call off with only 10-7 and better. They're still folding out 10-5, 10-4, 10-2. Actually, not 10-2, 10-5 and 10-4. But that's literally all the combinations, right? Solid 3 combinations of hands each, which is a decent chunk. They're obviously going to fold out the weaker sixes like ace-6 and king. Well, the sixes like ace-6, king-6, 9-6, right? They're obviously going to fold out 4-3. So if we're making them fold out all these hands, even if they're small portions of these hands, we're just going to be printing equity by over bluffing. Okay? Very, very important. Those guys would have folded earlier. With their 10, you think they're folding a 10 on the turn? Oh my God. Imagine the turn's a queen and they check everything and you bet 2/3 pot. Take a look at this. If they fold out all their 10s here, I don't even know how big of a blunder that is, but it's a big blunder. Like if they're going to fold out every 10 and every 6 and every 3 on the turn, there is no way they can win at poker. There's just no way they can win it, especially at poker tournaments where you got to try to get a hold of chips. They are never, ever, 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 ever going to win at poker if they overfold on the turn and they fold everything worse than a queen, or even everything worse than like 10-7. They have literally no chance to win at poker. What are all you saying in the chat today? Good morning. Let's see. What would I call Carrie Cat's strategy? Cagey. He's a cagey poker player. You just won a tournament for $1,800. Nice job. Good work. You had 20 big blinds versus the chip leaders 140. Good. Hope you're all having a fantastic day. My content is elevated. Night Fox's game. Good. I'm glad to hear it. If you like this content, do me a favor. Click the like and subscribe button. Tell your friends. How many tournaments can you expect to play a month when you're full time? Well, it depends on how many tables you're playing at once, right? If you're playing 16 tables at once, well, what, 30 or 35 or 40 or 50 a day? 50 a day times, call it 25 days a month, is, can't even do the math, 750? No, I can't do the math. Let's get out the calculator. I can't do math. You'd think I'd be good at math, but I'm not. Let's see. 50 times 75 equals 3,750 tournaments. No, that's not right. 25 days times 50 tournaments. There we go. 1,250 tournaments. I think that's a good amount of volume. I think that's reasonable. Again, it depends on how much you're playing, what stakes you're playing, etc., etc. You got a brutal cooler. Yeah, you know. What does MTT stand for? Multi-table tournament. I kind of hate that a lot of people have produced all this random poker vernacular. Why not just say tournament? You know? But a lot of poker players create poker vernacular that makes things difficult for people who are not super duper into poker to understand, and I think that's kind of lame. Folding a 10 to what sizes? Yeah, what are they folding? I mean, look, this is a 2/3 pot bet. You got to realize 2/3 pot bet is the only size used in GTO world here. We gave the solver pot, we gave solver small bet. So somewhere between like 50% pot and 80% pot is the ideal bet size. If you wanted to rerun this, the way you'd go about doing this is notice like bet small's never used and all ends never used and pots never used. So you could go back and you could run this and give it only like, say, bet 140 and bet 88 and bet 106, and you'll see which one it prefers. If you really, really, really want to drill down, for simplicity, these are part of the starter pack we actually have available that's included in the advanced tournament course at pokercoaching.com. All this is here. We have a script set up. We teach you how to run this on your own so you can have a nice little database on your computer. I wanted to make sure I'm using literally everything I give to all of you. I mean, look, if you go here, you see we have all of these trees that you can load for all these various spots, right? And then we have all of these situations ran. And like this took maybe 3 nights of running. I just load up my computer, run this stuff, and it gives me all these situations. So now we can look at, let's say, button versus big blind, 40 big blinds deep. Let's take a look at another spot. Let's look at, I want to look at one that's really good for the big blind. Good enough for the big blind. Let's look at 987. We'll look at this in just a second. Give it a second to pull up. For new viewers, it does take a while to understand this stuff. It does. It does. How do you not let variance affect your confidence? Why would variance affect your confidence? Sometimes you lose. There's a lot of variance in poker. Do you feel like watching replays and hand discussions is good? Most definitely. Do you think it works in lower stakes tournaments? Most definitely. Good, strong GTO strategies work well in small stakes tournaments, and also exploits in general in the high stakes are less effective, which is why you'll find that most of the best players focus on GTO first and exploits later. Ken said he just watched The Brock Wilson and Justice Saliba $10,000 online bracelet win with lots of ICM. That was very useful. Yeah, it is super useful. It's great. All right, here we are, 40 big blinds deep. Flop comes 9-8-7. Fine. On the flop, big blind's going to check basically everything. Notice they do have some tiny leads, some tiny portion of the time, whatever. Not going to be doing that. They check. Now the button does not get to bet very often at all. Well, I say not very often at all. This is, in my mind, like a rare betting spot, 9-8-7. 7-6-5 is even less, because that's better and better for the big blind, because that connects better with their range. So here we're betting using 2/3 pots, 3.5 big blinds. Notice we gave the solver lots of options. And then it's betting about, let's call it 42% of the time. What are we betting with when we're betting polarized? Usually your polarized range should be kind of obvious. Like if you're in a spot where you know, I'm not betting the spot that often. What does that look like? It's going to look like top pairs. Top pairs are basically always betting. Middle pairs with draws are basically always betting. Straight draws are betting most of the time, especially open-ended. And then some call them nonsense bluffs, but the nonsense bluffs are usually pretty obvious. The nonsense bluffs are basically always overcards with backdoor flush draws, especially the weaker ones. So notice that's going to be hands in this region. You're going to find that king high and queen high backdoor flush draw really likes to bet. Look, I realize they're not betting like every single time. And funny enough, it looks like solver's doing funny stuff with the clubs in this scenario. I guess because maybe it thinks king 6 of diamonds is too good. King 4 of diamonds is too good to bet. But notice stuff like, well, let's take a look and confirm what I said is true, right? Notice I said a lot of top pairs bet. Notice lots of nines are betting. Not always, though. Not always. This is a really dicey board for top pairs. But most top pairs are betting. At least a lot of top pairs are betting. Maybe not most. Middle pairs, I said, some of them, especially with draws. So notice Jack 8, 10-8. Actually, 10-8 and 9-8 are betting a lot. Also, what I say? I said straight open-endeds, especially. So notice 10s are betting pretty often. Not always, but pretty often. Right? So lots of 10s are betting. Also 6s. Notice a lot of 6s are betting. And that's about it. Surprised the trashy Jack X don't bet. Look, I mean, in theory, if you want to just take all of these and put them into the Queen X, it's probably fine. Or put them all into the King X, it's probably fine. Again, I don't think you need to be precise. This is what I think a lot of people get wrong, is they think, all right, I need to memorize this. But no, you don't need to memorize this. You need to learn the rules, which is what I just told you. Like, you should know 9-8X, I'm not betting that often, like, because that's a board that doesn't really line up so well for the button, and it's pretty good for the big blind. Fine. So, if that's the case, I just gave you the categories to bet. I literally just gave them to you. If you know you're not betting very often, that is what a polarized range looks like. And look, you're probably going to miss the ace-2 offsuit bluff. I would not have ever bet ace-2 offsuit here. I would have checked it back every time. And that would have been a mistake. Notice ace-3, ace-4, ace-5. These are all checking it back some portion of the time, but, you know, whatever. You're not going to play perfectly, and that's okay. But you do need to be betting in this scenario some portion of the time. And you need to know roughly which hands to bet. Also on boards like this, aces does not bet very often at all, whereas 10s will bet every time. This is a very common thing on these very connected boards. Aces needs way less protection than 10s. Okay? Surprise, 9-6 doesn't bet larger. 9-6. Pair would draw. I mean, look, all these pairs are betting a decent chunk of the time. It looks like it's betting, what, 60, 70, 75% of the time on average? This is the button range, by the way. This is the button range, okay? You can tell it's the button range because it has aces in it. This is the big blind range. Big blind range is here. Big blind checks everything. Now this is what we do on the button. So let's say we do bet 3.5 big blinds. What does the button... I'm sorry, what does the big blind do? You can always tell the big blind range because it doesn't have aces, because it would 3-bet its aces. The big blind range always kind of looks like this. The button range always kind of looks like this, where it has all the good hands. Just obviously strong linear range preflop, right? And then this range always does not contain the best hands because they would have re-raised preflop. All right, so what are we doing against a 3.5, 60% pot size bet? Against a 60% pot size bet, we do fold a decent amount of the time because we do have a whole lot of misses here, right? Notice all the overcard plus undercard are pretty bad. Notice the 5s for a bad gut shot are not good. Why are the bad gut shots not good? A lot of people say because it's a bad gut shot, obviously. Haha. Well, no, because if you get a 6, your opponent's going to have a lot of 10s, right? And that's really bad for you. You're going to have the bad end of the straight. The dummy end, as they call it. Because you got to be a dummy to play it. All right. All right, so what are we raising with? Even against this size on this board, we're going to be raising a lot of pairs plus draws and tens, just in general. I can already tell you, pairs plus draws and tens. And your obviously good hands. So pairs plus draws, what is that? Notice 10-9 and Jack-9 are raising a decent chunk. Notice a lot of hands with a 10 are actually going to be raising. Like 10-7 raises some. Notice 7-6 raises a lot, right? Notice 8-6 raises a lot. 9-6 raises a lot. These are hands most people do not raise. And then we have some weak gut shots, like 10-5, 10-4, 10-3, 10-2 are raising a lot. Notice King 10 and Jack 10 don't raise so often, though, which is kind of cool to see. Funny to see the Queen 10 raising, but if you check raise Queen 10 and get the Jack, you just have the super nuts, and you're going to set up your opponent a lot, so that's neat. I'm surprised more Jacks are not raising in this spot. We do see, like, Jack 4 randomly raising. We do see Queen Jack raising some. So, yeah, you know, that's fine. I guess Jack 6 is raising some. Effectively open-ended, right? But you have the bonus to the top. Okay, but take a look at what's calling now. So, remember, we're talking about 2 points here. Stop playing too tightly from out of position post-flop, and stop making thin plays for lots of chips. The thing is, whenever you're looking at these spots pre-flopping on the flop, you're usually not talking about a whole lot of chips. There's some chips and not a lot of chips. And I think you should be playing pretty close to this, if possible, at least on the flop. By the time you get to the river, maybe you do want to knit it up a little bit. A little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. So what is continuing that you may not naturally continue with? How about Queen 6? You calling Queen 6 here every time for overcard and bad into the straight draw? So I'm saying you can't afford poker coaching. Look, poker coaching has poker coaching premium, and it is kind of expensive, about $100 a month. I realize that. But it also has a free membership level. Go there, sign up, and get it for free. Watch my YouTube content. I think this stuff is decently high level, especially if you don't look at solvers all day like I do. And it's free. $0. I try to put out lots and lots of content for literally $0 because I know when I first started, I had $50 to my name and I had no money for anything. I did, however, spend all of my money on poker books back in the day. And if I was a poker player who wanted to get better at poker today, and I was actually inspired to do so, I would definitely be signing up to some poker training site as fast as possible. And I made pokercoaching.com to be the site that I wish existed back when I started. And to be fair, the site that I want to learn from today. Like they talked about Justin Sleba and Brock Wilson going through final table ICM. I mean, that's invaluable to anyone, even myself, who's pretty decent at poker. And that's what I've designed. I've literally designed gigantic courses for all of you. And if you actually have no money, I'll tell you what I'll do for you. Sign up to Poker Coaching Premium. It'll cost you $100. After a month, you will not have gotten $100 out of value because you have no money. Because you're playing tiniest stakes possible. So send us an email and ask for a refund. And I'll give you $100 back. Hopefully I will have made you more than $100 in that month. But if I have not, I do not want or deserve your money and have it back. You have 100% money back. Guarantee. Ask for your money back within a month and you'll get it. Okay? Literally free if you want to game the system. All right. So what is sticking around here? Notice Ace 10 is calling every time. That's a gut shot with overcards. That's a pretty good hand. King Jack. Ugh. King Jack is calling every time. Gut shot and 2 overcards. It's a pretty good hand. Can't go around folding the King Jack on the 9-8-7 board. Notice, basically all pairs are going to continue except for under pairs. Notice you don't really have under pairs, but like if you do have pocket 3s, that does fold out. Worth noting, perhaps, if you do call with 3s and 2s pre-flop, then you should fold. This is a terrible flop for you. You do have a pair, but it doesn't really matter. Do any other pairs fold? Well, it turns out they actually do. I think this might be a spot where people call too much. I think people call too little with stuff like King Jack, and I think they call too much with stuff like 7-2. They think, all right, pair, let's go. But no, pair is not let's go. Notice even 7-5 offsuit folds every time. I don't think I would have folded 7-5 offsuit. Oh, these people on Twitch and YouTube. Some of you are funny. Some of you are funny. All right. Notice 8-5. Not a great hand. Turns out the bad end of the gut shot is just basically a dead kicker. Kind of cool to realize bad end of the gut shot is basically a dead kicker. Notice like Jack 5 offsuit also folds, which does have a gut shot to the top, but dead kicker, it gets out of the way. Turns out you really don't like to have dead kickers that really give you no value. So, say we do call. Turn is whatever. Say we get a 2 of clubs. You're going to check every time because this does not connect well with you. Now, the opponent's going to be betting pretty often. This is where I may start slowing down with betting too frequently in tournaments, because at this point, I think a lot of people overfold a little bit too much on the flop. They may not have stuff like King Jack you can get to obviously fold. And I mean, to be fair, if they call every pair, maybe it's fine to keep bluffing if they're going to fold out a lot of pairs on the turn. But I bet they're supposed to fold out a lot of pairs on the turn, even on a brick too. So notice we are betting a lot in this scenario. What are we not betting? Anytime you're betting a lot, you want to ask, what am I not betting? Well, marginal top pairs, marginal middle pairs. Notice pairs with draws love to put money in the pot. So notice like Jack 9, Jack 8, 10 9, 10 8, 9 6, etc. Notice a lot of our Jack highs are going to be betting now, because this is a pretty good card for the button, because it's not good at all for the big blind. So let's keep betting a lot. A lot of ace highs are checking for the most part. Neat to see ace jack betting every time. I would have checked this one back. Again, you want to look for spots where maybe you would have messed up, right? Whenever you're looking at the solver, you're not going to be anywhere near perfect, but you always want to look for spots that are maybe spots that you would have not played that way at all, right? So if you ask me, what do I do with ace jack in this spot? I would say, check it back. If you gave me the king jack, I would say definitely bet, right? So like, I see the difference in king jack and ace jack, but this is one of these interesting spots where maybe because we don't have very many ace jacks, we want to keep betting it. I'm not sure. Interesting to see. Okay, so anyway, say we do bet here. We're going to be using medium size, I got to presume. Pot's 129. We're betting 77. Yeah, so medium size. You're going to find you don't really use a whole lot of giant bets when you're playing deep stacked, unless you're going all in on the river. Notice now, against the medium size on the turn, now some 8s are going to start folding, right? Notice 8s with dead kickers, 7 with dead kickers all fold. All the 7s and 8s fold that have no kicker. But even then, like ace 8, king 8, queen 8, these are supposed to fold here. Interesting to see. Interesting to see. Ace jack will often beat a weak ace at showdown. I know that. That's why I would have checked it. When you study a range chart, the information just seems like common sense. A lot of it is common sense, if you know how to play well. But like, to be fair, that ace jack bet does not make sense to me. Maybe it's just a random outlier whenever you're looking at this specific chart in this specific scenario against your opponent's specific range. Or maybe I'm overvaluing the ace high. Maybe I'm overvaluing the ace high there. I don't know. We have to do more studying, right? You have to look at other similar spots and see if it extrapolates. And look, if you've studied a lot at pokercoaching.com in the tournament masterclass, we go through and we break down many scenarios just like this, so that we've developed rules that will help you learn to play these specific, all specific scenarios. So essentially, you want to make sure that you have studied a lot of these charts, or at least have it studied for you, and then given you, you want to get rules so that you can learn to play these situations and all situations decently well. But like right here, does it make sense in your mind to bet the 10-2? I'm not sure. I don't know if I would bet the 10-2 here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong spot. It doesn't make sense to call the 10-2. Of course it makes sense to call the 10-2. What hands call that I may not think to logically call? Again, this is what you want to ask. And I think, if anything, I would have overcalled here. Because if you give me ace 8 on the 9-8-7-2 board, I don't think I'm folding the ace 8 ever. King 8, queen 8, I don't think I'm folding these hands. And that is obviously a mistake if your opponent's playing GTO. And we already saw the opponent's betting range should be pretty wide. So even against a wide betting range, ace 8, king 8, queen 8 are not great. Good to know. Also notice we're folding open-endeds now that have dead kickers, which makes sense, right? We're facing a slightly bigger bet. No guarantee we're getting paid on the river. So that makes sense. So we do call. Fine. River is, let's put another brick up here. 3 of clubs. We're going to check most everything. Yeah, most everything. Opponent's going to shove if they do bet. Notice they are putting pot size all in, and when they do bet, their betting range is going to be top pair, good kicker, and better, I have to guess. Right? 9, 8, 7, 3, 2. Yeah, it's going to be top pair, good kicker, and better. We do see, you know, right there. There's the line, right? Jack 9 does not bet. King 9 does bet. I think that's logical. So King 9 over pairs, obviously. 2 pairs, obviously. Straights, obviously. So what else is bluffing? Now you want to ask, what is bluffing? And I got to presume it's going to be basically every 10x we have and a lot of jack x we have. So let's take a look at this. So we have 10-5, 10-4, jack 5, jack 4. Makes sense. Queen 10, not every time. Surprise, queen 10's not every time. Queen jack, a ton as well. but not every time, right? This is a spot where I can definitely tell you I'm probably going to overbluff in this spot. Because, look, I know naturally you probably want to overbluff a little bit on the river in spots like this, but also, look, Queen 10 is not even betting every time. I would presume Queen 10 is going to bet a lot. Ace 5 and King 5. I don't know if I would have bluffed the Ace 5. Like, Ace 5 would not be the first logical bluff I would have used. I would have done, like, the King 6 over the Ace 5 if I'm sitting here within my range. But turns out that's not the case. Interesting to see. Say we do shove. Opponent, what should they call with? Are all in. When they get this Brick City River, they're going to have to call off lots of pairs because they're going to have a lot of unpaired hands, right? When your opponent has a lot of unpaired hands, they have to call off with a lot of hands that have pairs. So we do see, like, most nines calling, at least the good ones. Straights, 2 pairs, obviously all that's going to call. Interesting to see now some of the 8s sticking around still. But trash stuff's going to fold, and I think that's logical. Nice, easy spot. So would I be overfolding on this river? I think on this particular river, when it kind of bricks off, if anything, I might actually be slightly inclined to overcall, because I think most people, if you give them a random 10, are going to bluff all of them. And against, like, loose, aggressive battling players, they're going to have perhaps even more 10x suiteds in their range preflop than they should. So maybe this is a spot where we actually overcall. Let's put up a bad turn, though, for the opponent. Let's take a look. So, look, you said, wow, 9-6 offsuit calls. You got to realize your kicker doesn't really matter that much at the end. You kind of just want to block your opponent's nuts. So you want to beat some bluffs. I'm sorry, you want to beat some value hands. In this spot, though, that's not the case. But you really want to have a jack, a 10, or a 6. I'm sorry, you especially want to have a 10. Actually, I don't know if we want to have a 10. Let me think about that. What did we say the turn was? We did the turn 3. We did, 7 big blinds, call. River's a 3, check. Was the river a 3? No, it was the other. Was it the other way around? Oh, whatever. Let's say we check. Go all in. I think I'm looking at a different spot. I'm looking at a slightly different spot. 10 high blocks bluffs and straights. That's the problem, is the 10 high blocks bluffs. Maybe the 6 doesn't block the bluffs so often. Anyway, you can't see it here, but like 9-6 calls every time. I forget what I made the last one. It's hard to keep track of all this stuff when I'm reading the chat. All right, 9-8-7. Let's say the turn is good for the big blind. What's the best card for the big blind here? Anybody know? Check, bet 3.5, call. What is the best card for the big blind? I don't know for sure, but I have a guess. My guess is going to be a 5. Because notice, big blind has all the 6s. Notice, a 6 is not going to be so good because the button is going to have a lot of 10s, right? 7, says Louis Philippe, also might be quite good because we check call all the 7s. When I say, like, good for, it's kind of hard to say exactly what you mean. I mean, like, which one gives you the most equity, I suppose. Let's look at a 5. What I want to look at, which card are we leading the most on? How about that? Let's go to 5. 5, we lead 35% of the time. 6, we lead never. Why is 6 not good? 6 is not good because, like I said, they're bluffing a lot of 10s, right? What about 7? 7, we're going to lead a lot. All right, I guess 7's the best card. 7's clearly good because we check call all the 7s. What about 8? 8's going to be decent enough. We're leading a lot on the 8s. What about a 9? We're leading way less, I can tell you that. Way less. So it looks like the good cards, the especially good cards for us, are going to be 8, 7, and 5. What about a 4, you may say? 4, not so much. It's going to be terrible for us, actually, because now none of our draws came in, right? You essentially want to be leading when you have a range advantage or a nut advantage, right? And you have to realize when we check and call the opponent's bet here, we have a lot of 6s. Notice we have a lot of 6s, right? And we also have a lot of 8s and 7s. And if you look at the opponent's range, when they bet the flop, notice they don't actually have a lot of 8s. A lot of their 8s check, right? Look at all these 8s that are checking. So that means when they do bet, they don't have an 8. And when we call, we always have an 8. Therefore, the 8's good. Same story for 7, right? They don't bet their 7, so when they bet, it means they don't have a 7. So when they bet and we call and the 7 comes, we get to lead a lot. So let's actually take a look. Do we lead more on a 7 of clubs or 7 of backdoor draw? What was the 7 of clubs? 7 of clubs, we're leading, well, let's say we're checking 37. 7 not backdoor, or 7 with a backdoor draw, we're going to have to check more, right? Yeah, we check 48%. So the backdoor draw turns are ones we don't want to bet so often, because that's going to connect with some of the opponent's bluffs to where they have more auto continues against us, right? You essentially want to be leading a lot whenever the board's really bad for your opponent. So let's say we do get this turn. Are you actually leading a lot? Some players do, some players don't. Also, when you lead, how much should you lead? Well, the answer is small. If I had to go back and rerun this, I would rerun this with different bet sizes down here. I want to look at like a 1 big blind bet and a 2 big blind bet. Like here we're betting 3 big blinds, and we're betting 3 big blinds a lot. I bet if we gave the solver here a smaller bet option, it may actually bet more often. And for simplicity, you don't even need to run it with the big sizes, right? You can just run this exact spot with only small sizes, and you'll see a closer to GTO output, because maybe the right size here is smaller, and I think it actually is, because I've looked at these spots on my own, but I'm trying to look at exactly the starter pack we gave to advanced tournament course members. All right, so what are we leading with? Basically everything except for marginal made hands, right? Notice a lot of the 8s are checking, right? 8s check a large chunk of the time. 9s check some. 7s bet pretty frequently, but not always. Pretty frequently, though. And 10s and 6s are going to be betting a lot, right? So we do see 10s betting a pretty good amount. All these 10s are betting a lot. 6s. 6-4, 6-3, 6-2. I would have presumed these hands would have bluffed, but they do not. Interesting to see. I guess you do want to have a little bit of equity. With overcard, like Queen 6, you definitely bet, though. Straight draw with overcard is really good, just so you all know. Interesting to see a lot of these lower ones betting. But anyway, we should be leading here a lot. Say we do check. I'm sorry, say we do bet small. Opponent's going to call a lot. Although, one thing a lot of people here don't do very often is they don't raise nearly often enough. Look at this. They should be raising 25% of the time. When you lead on a turn that's obviously good for you, I can guarantee you most people do not raise nearly often enough at all, because they're scared of getting stacked against the obvious nuts. Like right here, say we do raise with our jacks, and the opponent then jams with mostly 7s. Surprise, surprise. Say they jam, you got to call it off with your jacks, right? A lot of people hate this spot. They hate putting their money in with jacks when they're just against a 7. And the GTO strategy, as you see, is to do this with a lot of 7s. And then some straight draws with good equity, right? So we do see Queen 10 and King 10 jamming a decent chunk of the time. 10-5 jamming a decent chunk of the time. Now, look, a lot of people don't necessarily jam quite so wide. Then, you know, maybe that makes the raise with the jacks worse to begin with. But look, against the small bet, you should be raising your hands that are likely good but vulnerable plus some bluffs. It's basically what you want to raise in every scenario. In every scenario, you want to be raising hands that are almost always good but vulnerable to being outdrawn. Those are going to be over pairs and top pair good kickers. And then some bluffs. And the bluffs here are obviously going to be 10s and jacks, right? So we do see 10-5, 10-4, 10-3, some jacks, some 6s with overcard. That makes sense. Is the leading range similar if an 8 paired on the turn? It's going to be similar enough in this situation, I think. Louis Philippe here in the chat, who runs the Poker Coaching Study Group, says, when the bottom card pairs, especially if it's a low and big blind, leads a ton. Correct. If it's a higher board, like Ace, King, Queen, and the turns of Queen, not so much. But if it's something like 7, 5, 3, and the turns of 3, yeah, a lot. A decent amount. Assuming they have a lot of 3s in their pre-flop range, and the initial raiser does not, which is often the case. If you get the advanced tournament course in poker coaching, you can download the Pile Solver starter pack, and it'll include a lot of these scenarios. So anyway, this is a spot where you want to be raising a lot, but a lot of people do not do this. Let's say we do call, though. Notice most of our range calls. Notice almost no folds, by the way. No folds. 19% folds. When they lead the turn, and you think their range is GTO / maybe even bluff heavy, you can't fold much of anything except for your total air balls, which are ace high, king high, and queen high with nothing else going for it. Okay? We call. River's what? Let's make the river a blank. River's a 2 of clubs. Now, pot is 19 big blinds. GTO strategy is mostly to bet tiny or humongous, all in. 31 big blinds. This is very common when you're out of position. We discuss this thoroughly in the tournament masterclass. Out of position on the river, you usually want to be betting tiny or gigantic when you are polarized, as we are here. We either have a 7, which is the nuts, which wants to load money in, nothing, like 10 high, which wants to load money in, Or we have a thin-ish marginal made hand. That's going to be a lot of nines, right? So notice our nines are going for small bets mostly, plus a few slivers of bluffs with like queen high and 10 high. Our sevens are mostly going all in, right? Although we do check some of them, which is cool to see. And then we're checking a lot of marginal made hands. That's going to be eights and ace high, and seven or twos if we have them, but we don't really have a lot of twos. You may ask, why check sevens? We're checking sevens sometimes because we want to make sure that we can just check it down with our ace high and win some portion of the time, right? If we do check, by the way, and the opponent then does jam or bet big, the in-position player will basically never bet small on the river. So say they do rip it in, we're going to call off all of our sevens, of course, and ace eight and ace nine. You know, we're calling off all of our value hands for the most part. We do fold out some eights, though. If they bet smaller, like 10 big blinds into 20, we're now going to raise with our sevens. Cool to see ace eight raising. Is that a bluff? A weird bluff? Weird blocker bluff that's probably good if it checks down, but if they bet, you're not good anymore. That's cool. Louis Philippe says, trick you learn from the advanced tournament course. On paired boards from in position, you get to bet one big blind. Yeah. You get to bet tiny. You get to bet tiny. I mean, as a good example of this, say the flop comes 6-3-3. Okay? We'll look at one more really quick, then we got to go. Flop comes 6-3-3. Big blind's going to check a lot. And I have here bet 1.5 big blinds, but you can actually bet one big blind. And look what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to raise a ton. They are supposed to raise a ton. Why are they raising a ton on 6-3-3? Well, notice they have a whole lot of threes, right? And if you look at the buttons range, they have not a whole lot of threes. No offsuit threes besides ace three, right? So they don't have very many threes. And in this spot where you have a lot of threes and they don't, you get to raise a lot. Notice the hands that raise are draws. What are draws on 6-3-3? Well, obvious gut shots and open-endeds, right? Those raise a decent chunk. But also, what else? Well, it's going to be cards that kind of wrap around the 6 or give the 6 additional equity, like 8-7, 9-7, 9-8. These are hands that will like to raise 9-5, 8-5, 7-5 is a gut shot. But then also backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, like the 4s and the 10. I'm sorry, the 4s and the 5s with backdoor flush draws. These are really, really good hands to raise. And when you check raise, you raise small. If I was to run this again, look at how these outputs are very skewed towards a 5 big blind raise over a 1.5 big blind bet. You should look at smaller raises. Right here, I think min raise is actually really sweet. If they bet 1, you can make it like 2.5. And I can guarantee you they're going to drastically overfold because it sucks to continue with the jack 8 or the jack 4 offsuit or like whatever. You know, it sucks to continue with these. Actually, you don't have these margin hands. Here you want to check raise. Let's say we do raise here. Let's look what they were supposed to call with. They're supposed to call it basically everything that doesn't have total trash, right? Every backdoor draw continues. All sorts of basically every ace high continues. So yeah, fun stuff. Fun stuff. This is a situation where you must continue very, 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 very frequently. And most people do not. So if you can put in this raise and get your opponent to fold out a ton, then great. Notice also, a lot of people are not going to re-raise you as often, like 9s, 8s, and 7s. Most people just call. But if they do raise, and then you rip it in, funny enough, the hands that rip it in don't actually include 3s. I'm surprised no 3s rip it in. Kind of cool. Say they do rip it in. Obviously, you call off with all these overpairs and whatnot, but if they do have 3s there, it gets a little bit dicier. So anyway, that's that. We're going to be done for the day. We have a coaching session coming out right now with Louis Philippe. A poker coaching study session. Get in there, have fun, learn with all the poker coaching members. Hope you enjoyed today. If you did, do me a favor. Click the like and subscribe button down below. Click the notification bell. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. If you all were not here, I would not be here either. Have fun. Make the most of your opportunity. Make the most of your week. I'm heading off to the U.S. Poker Open in 2 or 3 days. They have a bunch of $10,000 tournaments, $25,000 tournaments. I think they have a $50,000 tournament. Whenever you go off to the series, you never know if it's going to be especially good or especially marginal. So the 10Ks are going to be good, but you never know about the 25s and 50s. I'm definitely playing all the 10Ks. Probably going to play at least the first 25 and see what it looks like. If you show up on time to those tournaments, there is no rake, which is very cool. No rake is nice. They give you free food. It's amazing. So anyway, that's that. For all of you, if you want a sprinkle of action, I'm selling action, a little bit of action, on pokerstake.com at no markup. because I want to give you all a sweat if you want to sweat. No markup here. Get in there, have fun, enjoy it, make the most of your opportunity. Chat GPT recommended me as one of the poker coaches. Good. The AI likes me. The AI from 2021 likes me. Good to know. All right. Good luck. Have fun. Thanks for all for being here. Hope you all have a great day, and I'll talk to all of you next time. Bye-bye.